This is the great speech, the greatest speeches, the big speech. We're the speech guys. We have all four of us on. We're diving in to America. This is Landon, Mike, Matt, and Ross, and
What up?
we're working through history. Um, we hit Washington, we hit the founding, we hit AOC, Articles of Confederation, and now we're moving on to the next big name. Matt, who we talking about?
None other than the Thomas Jefferson, or TJ, as his friends call him. Um, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States. We'll get into more details on his biography later on. But it seemed supremely fitting that on this day, March 4th, which is the day of recording, um, March 4th of 1801. So this is the 220th anniversary of Thomas Jefferson's inauguration speech. All right, so we're going back 220 years to the day. Um, in terms of why Thomas Jefferson and why this speech, one, what better way to celebrate the 220th anniversary of his presidency? Um, But two, Thomas Jefferson, I would say, Mount Rushmore wise, he's on Mount Rushmore, the literal Mount Rushmore of presidents. Um, so after Washington, I think he's probably the next main figure, that just would be an appropriate person to cover and would be an appropriate person to really dig into in terms of what is America all about? How did it get started? And who are the big direction setters? Let us begin with an excerpt from his inaugural address. But every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. We have called by different names brethren of the same principle. We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists. If there can be any among us who would wish to dissolve this Union or change its Republican form, let them stand undisturbed as monuments of safety with which error of opinion may be tolerated, where reason is left free to combat it. I know indeed that some honest men fear that a republican government cannot be strong, that this government is not strong enough. But would the honest patriot, in the full tide of successful experiment, abandon a government which has so far kept us free and firm on the theoretic and visionary fear that this government, the world's best hope, may be possibly want energy to preserve itself? I trust not. I believe this, on the contrary, the strongest government on earth. I believe it the only one where every man, at the call of the law, would fly to the standard of the law and would meet the invasions of the public order as his own personal concern. End quote. All right, so let's just dig a little bit into the speech itself and kind of get our initial thoughts, and we'll kind of dig into a little bit more background as we go along here. So, Ross, what were your just initial thoughts on the speech?
Yeah, so I guess first thought when I read the speech was I think Jefferson, it came across that he really believed in this idea of this Republican government. So we talked about last week that Washington maybe wasn't really he was the leader, but he wasn't maybe the philosopher that put it all together, if that makes sense. But just it comes across, I think, just reading the speech and kind of some of the excerpts that you read, just how Jefferson really seemed to believe like that this was the answer and this was an awesome thing. And I just that came across, I guess, like he had believed in the idea of it, behind it, and I thought that came across very strongly.
Mike, what do you think?
Mike's like that kid in class right now that's like was kind of like looking away from the teacher. He's like hoping he didn't get called on.
I have nothing. I have nothing. Well, I think like contrasting it like to Washington, uh, it's a very political speech. I think, Washington was humble. He didn't want the job. He was just laying some of the baseline foundations down to so as to not offend anyone or, I don't know, push it too far. But when reading through Jefferson, he very much has an opinion. He has a partisan bone about him. And even though he says a line that we're all Republicans, we're all Federalists, which were the two parties at the time, which kind of has allusions to, we are not, I don't know, what was Obama's 2004
Not
speech?
not
It was
red states, not blue
red
states. We're the
states,
United
blue states,
States. Yeah.
United States, yeah. We're all of both parties, and you can tell even in a couple of probably pretty short years, there is now a faction of two parties that Jefferson clearly represents one. And he, of course, painted it in dreamy 18th century language, but definitely a different tone.
19th century, barely.
Barely. All right. Well, I think
So,
all of his training was.
something that struck me. I mean, I understand not as well as I should, sort of the interesting partisan nature of some of his comments. But at the same time, that opening piece of text that Matt opened with, but every difference of opinion is not a difference of principle. I mean, it's that statement in itself, Landon said, it's sort of elegant, and true at the same time. It reminds me of a conversation I was having with some other friends over Christmas. This idea that that sentence comes off as very conciliatory, very trying to bring people together, right? Because with the example of abortion, right? Pro-life versus pro-choice. It's not as if one side or the other hates babies or hates women, right? They're the principles which guide them are both present. It's sort of a matter of degree there, right? And maybe if that were recognized more often in the same way Jefferson is sort of getting at here, maybe we could make more progress. Though that's just one sort of bit that stuck out to me.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of whether or not, I mean, we're kind of getting at the question: did he really mean that, or is it "we are all Republicans, we are all Federalists"? Did he mean it, or is it a line? And I think, I don't know. I think with our current just general skepticism that seems to pervade modern America, I don't know, which maybe it's also there's also a misplaced nostalgia for kind of old America too. That's equally naive.
Hold on,
But
hold on, hold on, hold on. What do you mean by nostalgia and old America? And did he mean it or not?
so I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're currently very skeptical, which it seemed like Landon, you were like, yeah, this is a partisan speech, and he was just kind of saying that to appease people. Mike seemed to think he was more authentic, um, with the idea of that difference in opinion is not a difference in principle. What I'm saying is that we need to avoid the errors of just modern skepticism because that seems to be the prevailing attitude of the time. But we also need to avoid the nostalgia that I think we all four of us tend to fall into with less worshiping at the feet of George Washington or some of these older figures, because
Right.
I don't know, they're yeah, they're not certainly not above just the human desire for partisanship and kind of falling in love with their own opinions too. So
Right.
yeah, I think it's a complex situation here in America, and why don't we dig into a little bit of like who Thomas Jefferson was at this point. Like, where did he kind of grow up and come from? Just to like get an idea of where he is at, and then also just some of his relationships before he was president, because I think that's gonna, yeah, just understanding the American climate might be helpful for kind of tackling that question in terms of how authentic he is with his like call for unity.
Hey, can I add one other note on the inauguration speech? He hated formalities, and he actually showed up for the speech in like his plain clothes. Can you imagine a president? That'd be my kind of president for sure. Just showing up in, his business casual.
Sweatpants. It's gonna be incredible.
Wait, that
Everyone
that
loves my sweatpants.
That was a
that
pretty good impression.
that's true. I don't know. I just pictured Jefferson as like this French
Yeah.
bound
No,
intellectual
that's
savant,
yeah.
but given that he was also like Mr. Agrarian, I don't know, Renaissance man, like that doesn't really fit with like the prim and proper Washington mold. So I can both see the plain clothes and it's also very surprising.
He also dropped his horse off at the stable himself. He didn't let the valet take it.
Probably just a photo op, if you ask me. Look at me dropping my horse off.
Probably rolled up his sleeves and put on a construction hard hat too.
All right. Well, Matt, I think that's a good thought. Like to kind of dive into his life a little bit.
This
And,
is like Quentin Tarantino style. They're going back. Let's piece it all together.
well, I just think it's interesting. Like, I don't know, something that kind of stuck out for me, just looking into Jefferson's, I guess, earlier life, is I do think not only did it shape strongly kind of what we said about like kind of what I commented on. I felt like he believed in this ideal of the Republican government, and I think it's also kind of a little bit of a contrast then to George Washington, who we talked about in the last episode. So just a couple of things that kind of stuck out to me when trying to look at Jefferson and what formed him, if you will. Um, so he was born in Virginia, the third of 10 children, but he started education pretty young. So he started an English school, an English run school at age 5. And at age 9, he began attending a local school run by a minister, but he also around that time began studying Latin, Greek, and French. So you've got George Washington, who literally didn't know other languages, which might have caused a war. And then you've got Jefferson before the age of 10 studying numerous foreign languages. Um, he entered the College of William and Mary at age 16 to study mathematics, metaphysics, and philosophy. Um, he read people like John Locke, Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton. He was recognized as a man of exceptional ability. He attended a regular dinner party where they discussed politics and philosophy. So I don't know. I'm just trying to kind of like paint a picture here of like he was pretty well educated. So I'm not saying he was bred for the presidency, but these ideas of education and reading and philosophy and government, these weren't new things to him. Later on in college, he studied more French, more Greek. He played I mean, just to paint a picture, he played the violin. So that just really jumped out to me that like education, reading the classics, that was all a huge part of his kind of formative years. And then I think he ended up becoming a lawyer, I think, as well. So I guess just kind of in comparison to our George Washington, who, kind of more of a self-taught practical reader, that definitely would not be the bill of a Thomas Jefferson, who was very well educated, probably very intelligent. But yeah, again, I don't want to use the phrase like bred for this, but yeah. And then just an interesting fact we were talking about earlier. I mean, at age 21, he inherited 5,000 acres of land, which just seems like a huge parcel of land, and I'm sure it was huge in the 1700s as well. So I feel like he has the more classical fit to at least those formative years, kind of the educated, intelligent, philosophy-minded guy, which I would imagine had a big influence on why he was pushing so hard for his ideals, kind of like we said, kind of in the first not first political party. I don't know if you can say that, but sort of.
Do you guys think that the more education you have makes you more partisan?
I would
Or,
say
or also consider the other extreme of it. Extremely little education makes you more partisan.
so. We need just the right amount of education to avoid partisanship. There's kind of a nonpartisan window of education. Interesting.
Suppose.
I think I don't know if it would necessarily be like the degree of education. I would say higher degrees of education might make you more prone to being like an ideologue potentially, because like it
Which
gives.
would go ahead, finish it off.
I was just gonna say because it gives you this like very long opportunity to really immerse yourself in a stream of ideas, and I would imagine if you're not careful, like you could very easily like um just fall too deeply in love with certain ideas and like not let yourself deviate, or not question those. So yeah, I think there's something to that. Maybe not partisanship, but yeah, perhaps just falling into ideology.
I think education today is also different, like than back then. Like we're so specialized. So, um, like I have a graduate degree, right? But at the same time, like it was like my degree path was physical therapy, so it was very like specialized, and I studied these things, and this is what you get good at. Where like, I mean, what is this? So Jefferson studied mathematics, metaphysics, and philosophy. So like, if you're a math major today, you're maybe taking like philosophy 101. You're not like actually studying them deeply, let alone the ability to like produce new ideas in that field. Um, so I feel like just education, like higher level education, just seems different today than it maybe was back then, and how specialized we are.
Yeah, I think when you think of like the founders and whatever brilliance was in the Constitution and the opportunistic forming of government on a new continent and separating from British colonial power. I don't know. I always have that, there are 50 guys in a room, all like super classic liberally educated on, you know, all the ups and downs of Greek and Roman, Western civilization, kind of building upon whatever, freedom meant at the time. And, we learned that really wasn't Washington. He tried, and got some of it, but I think that kind of the founders were brilliant is mostly embodied in Jefferson's like diversity of thought and study and how deep he went in at least several areas of.
How did he get from the farm to Washington? Anyone know?
Via France. I think he kind of clawed his way up the political ladder, was the local rep to the Virginia House of Burgesses, however you say that. See, Virginia state governor, and then Continental Congress appointed him to head over to France and basically be a part of Ben Franklin was like the leader of the treaty that settled the dust after the revolution. Jefferson was the young whippersnapper right hand man to Franklin. So he, as we all know from the Hamilton musical, was in Paris for most of that in between period. But what they were working on were like treaties with Britain, most of the European world. And so when he got back from that, I think he was over there 5 or 6 years, pretty natural appointment to be Washington's Secretary of State, which nobody really knew what all the roles of the cabinet were meant to do, but Secretary of State being the foreign relations with other powers that be. Jefferson had all the contacts besides Franklin and Adams for foreign negotiation and relations. That got him back to DC, as we know.
So, kind of piecing together his, I guess, length, or not lengthy necessarily, but certainly diverse education with his exposure to public negotiation and policy and, foreign interactions and all that. Like, what were his relationships with other Americans like, or like, guess the other founding fathers, and like what kind of set him apart to kind of give a speech that is, I think, fairly partisan, so to speak, or certainly like has to address partisan issues at this point. So like, what are his relationships like with the other founding fathers, and who are his friends and enemies and whatnot at this point in time?
Sorry, really quick question. What was he doing during the American Revolution? Like, where was he at?
Just chilling in France,
On
sipping on whatever French people sip on.
Yeah, I'm showing he's going over. He wasn't sent over to France till 84, which we know was towards the end. So Franklin did a majority of the negotiations of the plenipotentiary.
Okay, sorry, I got it.
You got it? You found it?
Yeah, okay. At the start of the revolution, he was a colonel and named commander of the Albemarle County Militia in 1775, but then elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in September 1776. For nearly 3 years, he assisted with the Constitution and was proud of his bill of establishing religious freedom, blah, blah, blah. So it looks like he wasn't doing much fighting. He was just already politicking a little bit.
Sounds like Ross just uncovered Jefferson's dirty past.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Dodger!
He really was. When Benedict Arnold invaded Virginia, Jefferson looks like hung out a couple counties over with friends and never really took up the fight. He was also in France during the French Revolution when they stormed Bastogne, I had read.
Well, that's an interesting fact.
So, war kind of followed him. He didn't ever really partake. More of the intellectual on the sideline, which sometimes I'm sure was easier.
I know I did read he did condemn the violence, but certainly was for the principles. But yeah, I know there was a complex, the French Revolution. But yeah, kind of a complex relationship there. And I know that some of his enemies tried to pin some of the violence of the French Revolution and kind of, try to basically trip him up in that. Kind of paint him as like this revolutionary person, but.
Yeah. I have one other tidbit. All right. James Madison. I don't know if we're going to go deep on him. Did he write most of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers we know off the top of our head? He's pretty brilliant too, but he's kind of.
So Hamilton wrote, so I think this is from memory. I came across this earlier today. I think there were 85 Federalist Papers, and I think Hamilton wrote 51. Madison and John Jay, between the two of them, they wrote the rest, I guess. But it sounds like Hamilton, at least from the one source I read on that, seemed to do most of the work with the Federalist Papers, but Madison and John Jay were intimately involved with that as well. But I think Madison and Jefferson were pretty close allies during this period.
Right. So it's interesting that Madison and Hamilton wrote the papers, so they at least worked on that project together. They might have been I believe they're on different sides. Hamilton's on Washington's side, generally brought up in the world by Washington. But one thing Jefferson was working on, him and Madison in 91, while Jefferson was Secretary of State, mind you, started and founded their own newspaper, the National Gazette. And this paper in Philadelphia was a political puff piece paper, 100% partisan, and super anti-federalist, pro-democratic Republican partisan newspaper. It lasted just like 2 or 3 years, and all of the articles were written pseudonymously. Many of them written by Madison and Jefferson themselves. But I know we say stuff's partisan today, but even the founders were slinging mud, started their own papers. Even Washington came out and said one time that like he hated the National Gazette because they threw some punches.
The original Fox News.
With that. We'll get to the part of I kind of my bent on this research was the politics of what we're working with here, and Jefferson was involved there, and the Fairness Doctrine was not in force. 1791. Try that experiment. So it was one-sided.
What is the Fairness Doctrine?
We'll have to look it up. Generally passed in the 30s or 40s or 50s to ensure that every single news was controversial topic had to be presented both sides. If it was on air, definitely on air, maybe in print. Lasted about 30, 40 years. It was overturned in 87 under Reagan because it was obviously kind of doesn't uphold the First Amendment to say whatever you want. And so in 87, now you could be very partisan in the media again. And from that, once that hole was open, Fox News was started, Rush started taking off. But for a good portion of the 20th century, the law was on the books that you had to present both sides of controversial topics, which I think made things a bit more serene than we know them today.
Yeah, I just opened up the Wikipedia page for it. That's that's interesting. I never was even aware of that.
Yeah, I mean, we've dabbled with mild censorship or at least policing of thought before. I think it would sound, if we tried to do that today, I think it'd sound fascist or, whatever. And it would sell probably a lot fewer papers if the New York Times and Fox News were always presenting the other side. Who would want to watch that or read that when you can be built up with entrenching yourself in your own worldview? But Jefferson started it all, so we can blame him for that.
So what were the prevailing issues so it seems like, so we have Jefferson versus Hamilton. It's kind of this big, central fight, so to speak. How did that manifest itself? And how did he carry that out in his presidency too? So did he, we're talking about his inaugural address, which is kind of what he wants to bring. What did he actually bring too? So
right.
Yeah. How did that play out?
Yeah. So a little quiz game. There are two parties, early America. Anybody know them? Top of their head? Go.
Come on, Mike.
Hey, what?
They're Federalists
and Republicans.
And the Democrats.
There were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans.
Yeah, I thought that was too obvious because we just mentioned it in the notes.
All right.
That's all right. The dramatic pause was for the audience to think of their answer. That's what that was.
We're starting at the top. So let's go through it. and these are generally the leader of the Federalists is Hamilton. The leader of the Democratic Republicans is Jefferson. Okay. I'm curious, and there might not be a right answer, but let's hit the high point and see which party is which today. Because like Democratic Republicans, that's both parties today. Like, are they one of them now or two? So the Federalists were ruled by the wealthy class. The Democratic Republicans were ruled by the people. Dare I ask which party is which now?
I would say 4 years ago. No, I would say 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I would say the ruling class would be the Republicans and the people would be the Democrats. But Trump kind of had this like populist appeal, so to speak,
Yeah.
that I think murkies that water a little bit. Where I don't think it's clear post Trump.
Yeah. I think each side would pretty squarely. I mean, who wants to like be in favor of rule by the wealthy class, right? Like no side's gonna claim that anyway. So Hamilton concentrating power in the federal government or sharing power with state governments. I'll chime in. I think pro-federal government, definitely a Democrat Party thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That one seems pretty cut and dry. I see it as negative. I'm a little bit of a keep things as local as possible kind of guy. But I think most Democrats would like pretty proudly say like rule as much from the top and for all, in a positive beat. This one's interesting. Hamilton was a republic led by well-educated elite. Jefferson, the Democratic Republicans were a democracy of virtuous farmers and tradespeople. Where's the nuance there in between the two parties? Well-educated elite, virtuous farmers and tradespeople.
What do you mean? Where's the nuance? Like, where's the right answer? Or
Which one? Which
I feel
one
like
does it fit into a party today?
Yeah, I feel like
Party line still.
I think you're going for the back and forth, which is interesting because the previous question, it seems like in modern politics, a more democratic idea is more pro federal government, the Republican not so much, but on that specific issue, it seems kind of switched. Typically, I think you think of the kind of rural people going very Republican and the wealthy, the elite city dwellers going more Democratic, which sounds like it was kind of, if we're playing the game, it's like, you can't pin either one specifically to current policies because they seem to be switching places.
Yeah. Yep. This one's tough. Federalists were pro-Britain. Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans were pro-France. We don't care too much there anymore.
Yeah, who cares about France?
Yeah. And then the last one I'll say, I think if I was summing everything up, and I think books have been written about it, but Hamilton and the Federalists were an emphasis on manufacturing, and, essentially cities, economy based on manufacturing and shipping, needing a strong central bank. And the Jeffersonian Republican Democratic crew was an economy based on farming and agriculture and plainer people. Do those clearly stack into Democrats or Republicans today?
That one might be the murkiest for me. Simply
Think it's
because
murky?
I think so. Because one, I don't understand the role of the center of the Fed and I guess what we would call a central bank type of figure. I don't understand that very well, and certainly not how it breaks down party line wise. But in terms of like industry versus agrarian, or like city, if the question city versus country, like obviously city's more Democrat, country's more Republican. But in terms of like industry versus, I don't know. I mean, we don't even, and just because farming's just changed, I would say drastically since this time, like it's not even, there's hardly even a conflict between agrarian versus industry, just because everyone's pretty much industry at this point. It's just a matter if you're an industry in a big city or a small town.
Right. Yeah.
I guess that one seems pretty murky to me.
Yeah. I think the summary point on this would be general historical consensus is Hamilton's vision for the economic structure of America won out. Jefferson and his agrarian view definitely lost. I'd be interested to hear if anybody has a supporting point for what Jefferson tried to do and came up short in his time as president. And then secondarily, I think the point is like looking at how the parties were in 1800 and trying to back into them today. I think the lines crisscross, and some of the things we were fighting about then, which is mostly federal power of this new government versus states' rights power. That can certainly, I think, is playing out in parties, but issue by issue, not perfectly clear. I think the country has changed in a couple centuries and the parties have evolved, but kind of fascinating to see what they were arguing over.
Let's now that we've kind of got a good idea of that debate, how did Jefferson implement this? Like, what did his presidency look like?
Love it. Great question, Matt. Can the president buy land? That's, of course, that was on everyone's minds in the hot summer of 1803 when people couldn't get enough air conditioning in their houses. We got Louisiana Purchase, of course, big pillar of Jefferson's presidency. When we're talking Louisiana, folks, we're not talking about shrimp down on the coast, all right? Louisiana was bigger than that back in the day. We're talking shrimp on the coast all the way up to Canada, west to the Rockies, and east to Mississippi. That's Louisiana back in the day. Spain sold it to France in 1800. In 1802, James Monroe and Robert Livingston were sent to negotiate with little man Napoleon. We're talking about 827,000 square miles for $15 million at famously 3 cents per acre. You might be thinking, wow, that's a great deal. Boy, has inflation really hurt us. Okay, let me quiz you on this, numbnuts. In today's money, how much do you guys think the Louisiana Purchase would go for per acre, accounting for inflation?
So how much would it cost to buy like half of the country?
Yeah.
My day job is running the Zillow of farmland and valuing land digitally. I think the average land prices right now are, some of the Louisiana Purchase is ranch land. It wasn't tillable. We needed John Deere and the steel plow to come along to make it valuable. So this is pre-improvements. I'd put it at, $4,000 an acre in today's dollars.
Right. I'm not asking you what the actual market value is. I'm talking straight 3 cents per acre adjusted for inflation. Any other modified guesses? 60 cents per acre is what it would go for in today's money. Can you believe that?
So you're saying even then he got a heck of a deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Right.
So,
The inflation. Yeah. Gosh, that's nuts. That's a
um,
better deal than I thought it was.
if as Landon, I said average land cost, assume it's $8,000 per acre across the whole thing. So he paid about 1.3 million% less than what it was worth. Unbelievable. Hey,
That,
So why did
but
Napoleon agree to that? Like that seems. I mean, if there's ever a
uh,
really good deal on one side, somebody either got screwed or had something else they wanted, right? Like,
he was having some issues in some of his other colonies that he wanted money for wars. He wanted to feed the war machine. Little man syndrome, I guess he had.
so he wanted to feed the war machine. Why did Jefferson want it so bad? Or I guess not so bad. Maybe it was that cheap. He was just
Because
like, sure, I'll take it.
as Stephen Ambrose once said, this historian, he said he had a vision for America, extending this idea of liberty and democracy from sea to shining sea, or something like that. If you watch the documentary Lewis and Clark and the Core of Discovery. Yeah, I mean, I think it was basically as simple as that. He liked America and he wanted to see its ideals expand, literally from coast to coast. Um, so how do you figure out what's going on there? You gotta send an expedition. You gotta send men with the right stuff. Lewis and Clark. Meriwether Lewis, William Clark, and about 30 or 40 other guys. We're talking 2 years. No one, this was sort of a controversial aspect of Jefferson's presidency, kind of similar to the whole Apollo project, where we look back very excited by it. I mean, who isn't watching the Lewis and Clark documentary once a year just to kind of sharpen their knowledge? Um, but back then, yeah, it was a little more tenuous. Like, why are we spending this money? There are plenty of issues here on the home front to worry about. But Jefferson devoted about $2,000 to this project, or he got Congress to. And he kind of took Meriwether Lewis under his wing for a couple of years in order to train him in this project. Jefferson's library had more books on the West than any other president or any other place in the United States. He believed that there were woolly mammoth Indians who spoke Welsh, mountains of salt. So he was very intrigued by this idea here. Um, hey, don't forget though, on the topic of expeditions, the Thomas Freeman, Peter Custis expedition, they get left out, but they were also in there. So yeah, that's kind of one way that you see Jefferson's beliefs extending into the real world. Any questions on Louisiana Purchase?
Not specifically, because I feel like you're going to ask me another hard question about what something costs. But, so I feel like that kind of, in a way, fits his, like, dreamer persona a little bit. Like, right, we don't know what's out there. Let's go find out type thing, which we talked about a little bit. Like, he had these ideals. Like, what other, I guess I don't know a ton of, other than the Louisiana Purchase, I don't know a ton about his presidency. So, like, what else did he do? Like, why else is he on, is that why he's on Mount Rushmore?
Well, the literal Mount Rushmore, probably. I got one more on. We got the Chesapeake Leopard Affair and the Embargo Act. This was not the highlight of his presidency. What we're talking about here, this was the end of his second term, British hunting for deserters. Jefferson issued a call for a boycott on British goods. As such, Congress passed the Non-Importation Acts. The British ship Chesapeake fired on the U.S. Rather than going to war. The Embargo Acts would pass. Basically, nothing really happened to this, and Jefferson just looked very weak. So those are the only two notable aspects of Jefferson's presidency.
All right, there you have it, folks. He did two things in his 8 years. Um, one thing I'll add that I think is interesting and at least gives some nuance to, I think, the modern criticism, and like I think the modern like just criticism of Jefferson as a slave owner, right? Like that's not a good thing. Um, One is that well, I guess the only thing that I think is an interesting nuance is that he did pass an act that abolished the importation of slaves. Um, so it didn't abolish slavery. Like we were a long way away from that. I guess there's some. It's kind of up in the air like from historians in terms of what he ideally would have liked to do with slavery. I guess there's some folks that suggest he would like to see slaves gradually um, freed in some sort of basically just implement some sort of process to gradually free them. Um, but that, I guess he never really acted on it, and yeah, so that's kind of up in the air. But he did do that, which I think is at least, yeah, I guess at least gives some nuance to him as a slave owner, which obviously is like a really bad thing. So yeah, just kind of a random fun tidbit that I noticed with his presidency.
So to bounce back on that, Landon, on the topic of his slaveholding, the only slaves he freed were his children with his mistress Sally upon his death. Like, man, that's crazy. Even Washington released all of his slaves upon his death, I believe. So his children were his slaves for some time? That's crazy. You guys with me?
I saw that in the notes. I was interested by that too. I'd never really given that any thought. Like, were his children his slaves? Literally.
Here's another tidbit. I wish I would have opened my bit with it. Then I would have sounded like I had more depth. His election was the first peaceful transfer of power between opposing parties in Western history. Now you might be thinking, wait a second, Mike, Jefferson's the third president. Well, except it didn't really count Washington to Adams because Washington was independent. So there you have it.
Independent. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
from what I understand, Adams and Washington were both like I would say more governed more federalistly. So yeah, I guess they were very much on the same page with things too. But yeah, I mean Washington wasn't independent. Um, but yeah, no, that is an interesting. Yeah, that
That's so
happened.
fascinating. I mean, to even speculate, I mean, we're still like essentially the first mid-century modern democracy. So like, what would have been like? I don't know. I guess I'm just wondering like, what would have second place been? Like, what was the next closest possible political party power transfer of?
Are you talking about like within like other countries? Like what country? If we were the
Yeah,
first
that
one to
seems
do
like
that,
that
like who
seems
was the next
right.
one?
Yeah, it seems like a hard thing to Google. Like, if we were the first and only, what would have been like second place where it's like, well, there was this skirmish or a riot or a minor overthrow between parties when this kind of democratic thing happened in,
Hmm.
some mid-major empire of Germany, but like it was still like mostly all monarchies or non-democratic rule. So, huh, I don't know. That's a fascinating fact.
Yeah, and gosh, I guess it makes me think that we just take for granted that um
Yeah.
like just the nature of our country, and that at one point America was like a very fragile experiment, and it's like and something like this happened. There's a transition of power, and we're the same country still. Um, yeah, that is a
Yeah.
very very humbling thing to think about.
Yeah, we could quick Google it, but I remember it's like, yeah, I mean, we're not promised it. Like, clearly it can. be pretty fragile. And it even harkens back to what Ben Franklin, maybe it's myth, but when he walked out of the Continental Congress ratifying the Constitution and they got it ironclad, someone came up to him and asked him, because they were debating, like, will we be a federalist society or more state run? Kind of, will the House of Representatives model win out, or will the Senate model win out? They asked him, like, what kind of government do we have, Mr. Franklin? And he responded with, like, a constitutional republic, ellipses, dot, 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 if you can keep it, kind of emphasizing the fickleness, even right out of the gate, that not something promised or guaranteed to last, perhaps even a couple decades at that point.
I do just find it interesting, reading the different texts just from these obviously just first few presidents, how much they were concerned. Well, no, in this specific instance, there was concerns of civil war, not even necessarily just because of the slavery issue, but just because of this, tremendous thing that had never taken place, this peaceful transfer of power between leaders of different parties, that a realization, I think, should be a consoling, right? That to some extent that people are having the same conversations today. Are we going to break out in civil war? It's I suppose at some level it means that, well, that's good, because that means that people care, and people are trying. So there's a lot of negative things to be said for it too, but try to be positive.
And, like, to contrast, like, they care, I would say a large, some faction don't feel like they have a voice, but, like, you can care, you can fight. Like, we are only ever passing things at, like, a 51 or 2 or 58% majority, and it's always close, and you have to show up. I don't know, you contrast that with, like, communist China. Like, I don't know, the citizens, just hearing some anecdotal stories, like, you don't have that much of an active process in what the Chinese government does. Like, there's a difference between who rules the country and who is a participant in it, and you kind of just go along with the flow. You don't, like, get out of order. There's no way you're gonna, like, probably rise to the top and run the country. And you're censored, and you are a true subject of the state. And they've, like, embraced that. It's part of their curriculum. They don't think anything's particularly wrong with it, or some majority of them don't. And, we still very much have a say and want to control it for our own, our own sentiments about what government should be. And that's still reassuring.
So this sort of begins to digress, but hey, that's what podcasts are about. So I wonder what some scholar would have to say about why or why not the communist Soviet Union did not last, but communist China will. Or maybe it won't, but certainly it seems to have more going for it than Soviet Union did.
If I would have just pure conjecture there.
It sounds like
I think
a great final exam question, like for some college class.
I think they definitely just have, like, more people would be at least a part of the answer. I don't know if that plays into the significance of maybe some strategic political decisions they've made along the way the last 50 years.
I also don't know if China has run against the opposition as hard as Russia did. Because like all of Europe was pretty hard against Russia. Like the United States certainly was. Like I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm just not sure if there's been nearly as much pressure on China from the rest of the world.
That's fair. Also, I think there's some faction of Russians that like want to be Western and European, and like Russia's chip on its shoulder is that like it's excluded from the Western cool kids table, whereas like China has no interest in being a part of the Western cool kids table, and they're just like, you know, for a very long time they were a different part of the world and a different culture completely, and hasn't ever felt a need to be a part of the table until Nixon kind of convinced them to open up and come be a world trading economic superpower. Anybody know what
So
Jefferson thought of China?
I don't know.
Did China exist yet?
Have you ever heard the joke? Hold on? Have you ever heard the Chinese joke? A bunch of Chinese people were having dinner in Paris, and you know, asked across the table, like, you know, what did you think about, you know, how we handled the French Revolution? And Chinese guy was like, I don't think you'll know for at least another 100 years how it, like, what it meant. Like, it's still far too early to tell what that meant. Like, just a long history of, you know, perhaps somewhat of like the Asian Eastern culture is like they're in it for the long haul, and these little wars and tribulations like that the Western world does, they kind of see as like petty spats that we're not playing the long game.
Speaking of long game, this doesn't have that much to do with the long game. Um, so with with what we're talking about, well, I think an interesting quote by Woodrow Wilson. To be honest, I don't know the context for this quote, but he called Thomas Jefferson a great man, but not a great American. Just due to his what he thought were extreme, uh, uh, I guess Democratic Republican views or extreme, anti-federalist views. Um, does that have any bearing? Is it justified in any way, shape, or form? Just knowing how Alexander Hamilton's view seems to have won the day, seems to have like that's kind of what we understand as America. Would a more radically, uh, I don't know, state emphasized government, um, have fallen apart? And is that critique justified?
Sorry, can you say just the quote one more time?
So Woodrow Wilson said that Thomas Jefferson was a great man, but not a great American.
Hmm.
I've got some thoughts off the bat here.
Yeah, I have some too. Lead
To
it off,
bring
Mike.
us home potentially. Um, you know, I just really don't see how the core American ideal could be closer to federalism versus Democratic Republican. Um, and I say it because of this, because I mean, how could there be any example of strong government than being a colony, right? I mean, with the idea of, oh, if you've got a really strong central government, they're going to exert their force over a larger area, right? Um, but instead, you know, we obviously decide, no, we want to rule ourselves. Something more like subsidiarity, something more like states' rights. Um, so I find it really ironic that, um, as we were sort of discussing, Federalists in this sense, modern day people on the left who are about strong government, like how is people in Washington going too far and telling how people in other states to live? How exactly is that different than the force that Great Britain exerted on the colonies, right? Where you're imposing a certain kind of rule which is inappropriate for those people. So I disagree with Woodrow Wilson. I vote no.
Like what Mike said, I'm also going to disagree with Woodrow simply because, I mean, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. So, like, how can you say, I mean, like, that's like saying James Naismith wasn't basketball. I don't know. Like, it's just like, he wrote I don't know. That's my thought. So maybe
Hold on.
less intellectual than Mike's, but that was my first reaction.
Say the quote one more time.
So Woodrow Wilson said Thomas Jefferson was a great man, but not a great American.
Well, I mean, he's kind of a draft dodger. He didn't help out with the American Revolution. He wrote the document, hid in the country with his friends, and then didn't help out until we needed him in Paris to like get Franklin over the line for the treaty. That was like a mark against him that came up tonight. And then, like, if we would have done the whole states' rights agrarian thing, like, we would not have won World War One or World War Two. Like, I don't think 20th century America would have been a thing at all had Jefferson's vision won over Hamilton's. We would be, Canada or I don't know, some aspects of Brazil. Like, we're the same population as Brazil, somewhat of similar time frames of economic development. But they didn't get as quickly to like the industrial engine that we built around an economy. So yeah, I can see
What's
what
your
he's saying.
answer? Yes or no?
A great American. I can see where Woodrow's coming from. Lesser than Mike and Ross.
Yeah, I would. I think there are certainly valid criticisms, and I think there are certainly things that the central government does that we actually appreciate. Like the EPA. Like, all right, that's a good thing. Now that we have all this industrial stuff, like you don't want, you know, crap in our water and dirt in the sky. But yeah, I mean, I think that to say that Thomas Jefferson would necessarily be against any sort of intervention is it's kind of an anachronism, kind of putting things on him that he didn't have to deal with. So I'm going to firmly rebuke Woodrow Wilson. Thomas Jefferson is a great American. He is a great man. Um, but yeah, definitely kind of got a lot of partisanship rolling, it seems like. And it's not like he was the only person who was involved with that either. I imagine that's probably a very natural, um, a very natural thing, to have evolved in a country like ours. So
One quick comment. I do think, just like thinking through, this is going to be important stuff. Maybe not next episode, but the ones that'll follow, like states' rights versus federalism, Kansas Nebraska Act, Missouri Compromise, just like the tinderbox of America's journey a couple decades down the road is the direct result of this political grind of should federalism win out or states' rights, and for much of the South. That's gonna be called upon soon. So I think we'll get there.
Good foreshadowing to end this week's edition of the Speech Guys.